11 years after independence, Professor Ahmed continued, inviting 2 student volunteers to join Fatima on stage. Pakistan faced its first identity crisis. He positioned the 2 male students at opposite sides of the stage, with Fatima between them. Ayub Khan, Pakistan's first military dictator, stands here, he said, gesturing to one student who immediately straightened his posture and adopted a stern expression. He promised modernization and economic growth. Some called it Pakistan's decade of development. The professor handed him a prop sword labeled military rule. But across the country, he said, turning to the other student, East Pakistan felt increasingly marginalized. Despite housing the majority of Pakistan's population, East Pakistan received a minority of its resources. The second student hunched slightly, looking resentful. The professor placed a scale between them, visibly imbalanced. As dramatic music played, Professor Ahmed narrated the growing tensions. Linguistic disputes when Urdu was imposed as the national language despite Bengali being spoken by most citizens. Economic disparities as West Pakistan's industries flourished while East Pakistan remained primarily agricultural, and political marginalization culminating in the 1970 election. When the Awami League won a democratic majority, the professor said as the lights shifted to red, West Pakistan's leaders refused to accept the results. The tension in the auditorium was palpable as Professor Ahmed described the brutal 1971 civil war. Real testimonies from survivors played over the speakers while images of the conflict flashed on screen. By December 16, 1971, Pakistan had lost its eastern wing, he said solemnly as one student walked off stage. Bangladesh was born through blood and fire, forever altering Pakistan's national identity and forcing a painful reckoning with its founding principles. Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, confronting a chapter of history rarely discussed so candidly. Fatima's heart raced as the auditorium lights dimmed. This wasn't just another university lecture. Professor Ahmed's famous 10-minute Pakistan history presentation had become legendary on campus for transforming dry history into an unforgettable experience. Before we begin, Professor Ahmed announced, his voice resonating through the packed room, I need a volunteer. His eyes scanned the audience before settling on Fatima. You there, would you mind joining me? Reluctantly, Fatima made her way to the stage as the professor pulled out 2 scarves, one white and green, the other orange and blue. Imagine you and I have been neighbors for centuries, he said, draping the colorful scarves over their shoulders. Then suddenly, someone draws a line between our homes. He dramatically pulled the scarves apart, tearing a piece of fabric. The sound echoed through the silent auditorium. This was partition in 1947, not a simple redrawing of borders, but the violent tearing apart of communities, families, and lives. Behind them, archival footage played, streets filled with refugees, overcrowded trains, chaos at border crossings. The professor explained how Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a London-trained lawyer turned visionary leader, championed the two-nation theory that led to Pakistan's creation as a homeland for South Asia's Muslims. Pakistan was born with a geographic impossibility, Professor Ahmed continued, displaying a map showing East and West Pakistan, separated by 1,000 miles of Indian territory. Imagine having your kitchen in one neighborhood and your bedroom across town, with your rival's house between them. The audience laughed, but grew somber as Professor Ahmed revealed the human cost. Nearly 1 million dead and 15 million displaced in history's largest mass migration. Fatima stood frozen on stage, suddenly understanding why her grandmother still wept when speaking of her abandoned childhood home in what became India. The lights changed again as Professor Ahmed invited more student volunteers to the stage, creating a political drama in real time. After the trauma of 1971, a charismatic new leader emerged. He announced as a student wearing a red cap strode confidently center stage. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto promised to build a new Pakistan from the ashes of defeat. His socialist slogan, Roti, Kapra, or Makan, bread, clothing, and shelter, resonated with the masses. The volunteer playing Bhutto passionately delivered one of the leader's famous speeches about lifting up the poor. The audience watched as he symbolically distributed land deeds to students representing peasants and nationalized industries represented by other volunteers. But Pakistan's democratic experiment proved fragile. Professor Ahmed continued, as another student marched onto stage in military attire. General Zia-ul-Haq seized power in 1977, later executing Bhutto despite international protests. The professor shocked the audience by having the Bhutto character dramatically executed off stage, leaving an empty spotlight. Fatima, still on stage, now represented the average Pakistani citizen watching these political transformations. Professor Ahmed handed her various props symbolizing the changes under Zia's Islamization policies, a modified constitution, new laws, and religious textbooks. The most compelling moment came when Professor Ahmed explained Pakistan's role in the Soviet-Afghan War, using a large map and having volunteers represent Soviet forces, Afghan Mujahideen, and American CIA operatives. He physically demonstrated how Pakistan became the conduit for weapons, training, and funds, forever altering the region's security landscape. These decisions made in the 1980s, he said pointedly, would have consequences that still echo today. The audience gasped when the professor revealed the classified documents showing the billions of dollars that flowed through Pakistan during this period, and photographs of young militants, some of whom would later become leaders of terrorist organizations. When discussing Benazir Bhutto becoming the first female leader of a Muslim-majority nation in 1988, the professor invited a female student wearing a white headscarf to take center stage, recreating Benazir's iconic oath-taking ceremony. For the final segment, Professor Ahmed transformed the stage into a multimedia experience. Multiple screens displayed different aspects of Pakistan simultaneously: its vibrant cities, spectacular landscapes, economic challenges, and security concerns. Pakistan's story in recent decades, he explained, has been one of contradictions. He guided Fatima and the other student volunteers through a living timeline, physically positioning them at key moments. Musharraf's 1999 coup, the post-9/11 alliance with America, the surge in domestic terrorism, the lawyers' movement for judicial independence, Benazir Bhutto's assassination, and the restoration of democracy. The professor pulled out his phone and displayed social media reactions from ordinary Pakistanis during these events, giving voice to citizens' perspectives rarely featured in textbooks. Today's Pakistan, Professor Ahmed said as drone footage of major cities appeared on screen, is a nation of 220 million people with a median age of just 22 years, a country quite literally defined by its youth. In the most powerful moment of the presentation, Professor Ahmed had all the student volunteers, except Fatima, leave the stage. He then invited audience members under 25 to stand. Nearly 80% of the auditorium rose. "This is Pakistan's reality," he declared, "a young nation facing all problems: political instability, economic uncertainty, water scarcity, and regional tensions." He gestured to different corners of the room where he had stationed 4 students representing Pakistan's neighbors: India, China, Iran, and Afghanistan. Yet this same youth represents tremendous potential, he continued as the screens displayed Pakistani achievements in sports, arts, technology, and business. The world's 5th largest population, nuclear capability, strategic location connecting South, Central, and West Asia, a diaspora spanning the globe. As he neared the 10-minute mark, Professor Ahmed concluded by having Fatima stand in a spotlight while images of Pakistan's 75-year journey flashed rapidly behind her. Pakistan's history isn't just about political leaders and military conflicts, he said passionately. It's about resilience, about a nation that has faced partition, war, dictatorship, terrorism, and natural disasters, yet continues to persevere and evolve. The lights came up as exactly 10 minutes elapsed. The audience sat in stunned silence before erupting into applause. Fatima returned to her seat transformed, no longer seeing history as distant events in a textbook, but as living stories connected directly to her own life. As students filed out, Conversations buzzed with questions and insights sparked by the presentation. Remember, Professor Ahmed called after them, understanding our history isn't about dwelling in the past. It's about shaping our future with clear eyes and full knowledge of where we've been.